Hey folks, Beardo here. You are watching Minutia Minute. Wanted to do something a little bit different today. Normally, I would review new books just as part of my usual Wednesdaytopia. As you know, if you watched my video yesterday, I did pick up Sinestro #1. But instead of reviewing it with my regular Wednesday books, I wanted to do a little bit of a sort of compare-contrast with Cullen Bunn's other sort of evil character book, this one coming from Marvel, being Magneto, which also launched this month. I believe it's already on issue 2, but I think it's a twice a month kind of a thing because it's Marvel, so I'm probably is. I thought it would be kind of interesting just because these are very, very different but come from a very similar place. So I'm going to start by giving just kind of a quick explanation of Magneto. Who is, and the reason I'm starting with Magneto, by the way, is because this technically is the book that came out first, even though they're pretty much coming out at the same time, and I probably wouldn't have actually picked up Sinestro if it wasn't for the strength of Magneto. So anyway, Magneto is a book about a man who was wronged in his youth in a really terrible, sort of genocidal way. He's gone through this terrible trauma that has made him who he is today. He is all about nothing but vengeance, and he has almost become, as terrible as the things he was in some way rebelling against through that trauma. He's a very sympathetic villain. He's a character who is normally part of a much larger ensemble, of course, as not a member of the X-Men, but part of that series. And this is his big chance to just kind of be his own book. On the other hand, let's take a look at Sinestro, which is remarkably similar, right? It is a book about a guy who, had some terrible things going on when he was younger that, pushed him to the point where, he was too controlling over his people, and he became all the things that he was sort of trying to protect the people from, almost in a way. And he's normally also a part of an ensemble cast of characters, in this case the Green Lanterns, although of course he himself is not a member of the Green Lanterns. He's of course a member of the Sinestro Corps, and this is his sort of big chance to shine in his own book. Both these books written by Cullen Bunn, and both of these dealing with pretty similar characters in what is thematically potentially a very similar situation. However, what you get in these two books couldn't possibly be more different. And the reason why I wanted to talk about this today is it kind of plays into some of the things that people have been talking about in the community lately. Oddfellow's Thoughts was just talking about, how he's really disappointed in DC because everything feels like one event leads into the next event, and there's never a breather. You never get to really develop these books. And so it just feels like constant overload, constant upping the ante, way more than it should be. And it's not really growing the story or growing the characters. It's just one thing on top of the next thing on top of the next thing, game changer on top of game changer on top of game changer. And on the other hand, they could be sort of taking their time and really building characters and really, getting you invested in what's going on. I don't know if I said this in a video or if I was just talking with someone recently, but one of the things I've noticed from DC lately is they've been putting out a lot of #1s. They aren't even really #1s. They're just kind of in some way, being put out as sort of this big new book, but it's really just sort of ultimately serves as sort of a tie-in to some other thing that's going to come up in, 3 to 6 months that ultimately will basically infest that book throughout the entire course of its run, and then it gets canceled at the very end of the big event. Of course, books like Pandora are good examples of that. I don't know if Phantom Stranger is ending, but I feel like that's kind of one of those books. Justice League of America is definitely one of those books. And The Flash, not the current run of The Flash, but before the New 52, that ran for like what, 10, 12 issues, and it was like a Brightest Day tie-in, and then it became a Flashpoint tie-in or a lead-in, and then that was it, you know? It's those kinds of things that DC just seems to be really infamous for lately. And so, on the heels of all that, these two books show up on my reading list. And it really, really exemplifies the difference between the two publishers. And this really pains me right now because I'm a DC guy. Like, I've always been a DC guy. I'm not that big on Marvel. I'm not that big on their number ones and the constant, the big giant number one there where, they keep rebooting series and just throwing millions of new series out there and completely diluting the market. But at the same time, editorially, DC seems to be really, really struggling. And this is such a unique situation because you have these two characters who are so similar in a lot of different ways, even though sort of their setting is very different. And it's the same writer, and yet you get these two results. So let's talk about Magneto for a second. Magneto is a book that it feels like it's establishing its purpose. In the very beginning, you get some, a really poignant story, and the second issue I'm not really going to talk about, but really, really poignant ending to that issue as well. So much irony to be mined from the Magneto character and the situations that Cullen Bunn is putting him in this book. And you really get a sense that the book has a purpose. It's a book that's there for a reason, that's not just part of something else. It's to really dive into this character of Magneto. Hawkeye not that long ago felt like it was a book with a purpose, even though it's kind of jumped the shark lately. Those first few issues of Hawkeye, it was doing something unique artistically and characteristically. The character was doing something unique, or it was a unique take on the character that justified the book's existence. And it becomes a really satisfying ride. In this book, there's, again, irony. It's all irony, and it's all sort of tragedy as you go through this read, and it makes you think. You sit down and you read it, and it's a book that stays with you. Now let's flip to the other side, which is Sinestro. And I haven't been the biggest fan of Green Lantern lately. I haven't dropped Green Lantern, but it's just been very up and down since Jeff Johns left. And even when Jeff Johns, came on with the New 52, his quality was up and down as well, even though he was sort of the tried and true guy to do Green Lantern. But I was hoping for something that would be more than just a cash grab. And I was hoping for something that would really dive into Sinestro because it's Cullen Bunn. He did an amazing job with Magneto. And, there's a lot of potential for that character. He's always been, or I should say since Jeff Johns sort of reinvented the character almost. I don't want to say reinvented. That's maybe a strong word. But since he focused the character to such a degree with his last Green Lantern series, Sinestro has been a really interesting guy that could really be explored further. What do we actually get in this issue, though? We get basically what feels to me like it's going to be just kind of a tie-in. We get Sinestro, who is kind of off on his own, and he's dealing with the repercussions of what's happened since what probably was it whatever the last issue of Jeff Johns was, where I'm pretty sure that's the one where we kind of sort of get the final comeuppance of Sinestro, and it's going to be a while before we get to see him, and of course here's where we do see him. So he's just kind of reeling from these events, and as the plot unfolds, we get basically a bunch of Easter eggs, and here's one of them actually, of basically portents for what's to come. And it doesn't feel like it's necessarily things to come in Sinestro. It seems like it's things to come in the greater Green Lantern universe. And I could be wrong about this, so, time will tell. But either way, you're introducing these big, broad things. You find out that there are people of Korugar who are still alive, which is like you could devote several issues to that alone. It's a throwaway element in this, just to kind of further the story And on top of that, they throw in the signs of these new villains. And again, it's one of those, within this issue, there's like 3 or 4 things that could sustain this book on its own, but they just kind of throw them at you over and over because it's like you got to go for the shock value, you got to go for the, oh my god, what's going to happen next kind of thing, and not really just let the character grow and breathe. And it feels really, in the end, this book felt pretty lackluster. I mean, it wasn't terrible. And like, as someone who reads Green Lantern, like, I guess it was kind of satisfying on that level, but not anything beyond that. It's not a book that, unlike Magneto, took the time to kind of justify its own existence and, have a real purpose for being on the shelves. I think it's noteworthy that Magneto is a book that anyone could pick up. If I gave this to someone who's never even heard of the X-Men, and just said, here, read this. They can read sequential art, but for some reason they've never heard of the X-Men, right? You can get this book. It's not just because it's so bogged down in continuity, but because the character is so clear. And it's about that character. I mean, you could just get sucked in. Like, I mean, it's not that hard to figure out that, there's this guy that has, the powers of, moving metal or whatever, or manipulating metal. Not that big of a stretch. And anyone could sit down and read this book. If you were to sit down and read Sinestro, or I should say, if you were to give this book to someone to read who has never read Green Lantern before in their lives, and never even heard of Green Lantern, and they were to sit down and read Sinestro, they would be completely lost. Excuse me. And it's not just because the idea of a Green Lantern ring and the Guardians and, all that stuff. Obviously, it's a more complicated universe, and I don't mean to, knock the book for that. I mean, that's just the nature of what it is. But that's not really the only thing in play here. It's the fact that they are so reliant on current continuity that I feel like if I hadn't read the first 30 some odd issues of Green Lantern leading up to this, plus whatever all has happened in Green Lantern before, when it was before the New 52, basically all of Jeff Johns' run, I feel like this would just be kind of a confusing read to me. It wouldn't really have any meaning. Because, again, it's because we're not justifying the existence of this. We're not justifying the existence of a Sinestro book by explaining the value of the Sinestro character in the book. You're just supposed to like it because it's Sinestro and he's a famous character. And so they just dive right into the story, and that should just kind of be enough. And it's not. It just leaves for just a pretty lackluster read, which is too bad. And again, it wasn't terrible. It just wasn't enough for me, especially coming off of Magneto. And it says so much to me that, there's been so much talk about, DC's editorial staff being just a bunch of jackasses, more or less, I feel like, or, people quitting, they're going to Image, they're going pretty much anywhere besides DC, because DC has, with the New 52, become so continuity heavy that it's like now they just can't seem to stop, or can't seem to take a step back and let a book kind of live and breathe and be its own thing. And so you get this guy, this talented guy who's known for doing these kind of characters, and over at Marvel he can pull something off like Magneto, which is riveting and really emotionally charged. And then at the same exact time, under a completely different editorial staff, deal with a character with a lot of the same themes and a lot of the same elements, even though, again, different setting, and come out with something that's so remarkably devoid of humanity. And that sounds really brutal. Maybe that's more brutal than I should be saying it. But, I mean, that's really, if you boil it down, you don't feel much when you read this book. You don't have a lot of sympathy. And, he's finding out that his people are still alive. Like, that should have some serious emotional resonance. But because they haven't really, established the stakes of that, or explained really who Sinestro is within the context of this book, it just doesn't mean very much. And it's hard to really pin down. Like, I like to blame things on the editorial staff, and in the comments people will say, oh yeah, I hadn't thought about, maybe it's the editors, or, blah, 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 blah. And it's always unclear because, editors are in the periphery. They're the puppet masters pulling the strings, and you don't really know to what degree they're influencing a book or a creator. But what a great example of something that is clearly being editorially manipulated because, again, the only thing different is the publisher and the publisher's mandate, and you get such polar opposites in terms of quality. And I thought it was a really good example of what editorial tinkering can do to a book. I could be wrong. I can't prove any of this. But I really think it speaks volumes if you just kind of read a little bit between the lines here, which is why I wanted to do this video in this context. So, kind of ending on a downer, I suppose, especially for me, because again, I'm a big DC fan, but I definitely have to side with Travis in the sense that, like, I'm really disappointed in DC right now. They're just kind of cutting off their own hands, is what it feels like. And it needs to stop. They need to just take a step back and just let creators do something with the work. It seems like whenever someone tries to do that, they just get frustrated and quit. And I'd be really curious to see how long Cullen Bunn stays with DC. If he were to leave in 3 months, remember this video and my accusations I'm making towards the editorial staff. And again, completely accusations. I can't prove any of it. But it just seems very clear to me. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Like, comment, subscribe, blah, 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 blah. I'm Beardo. You just watched my Minutia Minute. Thanks for watching.